we're going to show a 2-minute trailer to Visions of Tomorrow that some of you may have seen.
What is hope? Where does it come from? How can we let it guide us? They say hope is the dream of a soul fully awake. Where are the people who are awake in this world? What do they have to say to us about the future? Our future.
It's not rocket science.
You know, we really are a family on this planet. We really are a global community.
So there has to be the sense that there's hope.
Thank you. You know, every time I talk, I try to get scared. I do get scared, and then I come up with something a little different. This is the project of my lifetime, and I pray that each of us ends up having the opportunity to get to the project of a lifetime. I have no doubts, but that everything I've done led to this. And it requires collaboration, it requires help, and I'll tell you what we've done so far to get to this point. And I'm going to give you a little bit of history as to why this became my project, because Visions of Tomorrow is about making a movie first. It's the first project is a movie, but there's many other projects beyond that about solutions in one movie to all of the world's biggest problems. I mean, it's a little bit of a tiny little idea, but let's solve all of them. Let's go through energy, let's go through, you know, overpopulation, let's go through economic disparity, let's go through shortages of fuel and shortages of food. Let's go through everything that causes war and trouble and hatred on this planet. And let's find the scientists who have the answers to each one of those issues, and the philosophers. And then let's challenge ourselves. Okay, if we can fix that, and 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 we can show that in 50 minutes, which we can, then let's talk about us and why we are so full of fear and concern and anguish that we don't believe we can do it. Don't you realize that thoughts become things? That every single thing we let into our brain is what we're creating globally as a society, as a planet. And if globally we realize and believe that we can fix it, globally we will. But the time is, I had to say it, the time is fucking now. There's no more time to waste. And if we do it now, the planet is going to be incredible for our children's 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 children. And if we don't do it now, the planet's only going to be able to support half as many people. And that's going to happen very, very fast. So, you know, it's great we have oil. You know, it's great we have electric cars, but they take coal at the power plants to fuel them. You know, there are a whole bunch of solutions that need to be rolled out, and they need to be rolled out fast. What we need right now is what I saw in the 1960s when I was a little kid. There was this dream that John F. Kennedy had that we could get to the moon and that we could do it in 7 or 8 years from the time of our first flight into space. And he created the Apollo program, and you know, a bunch of 20-something engineers did it. Well, today we need about 6 or 8 Apollo programs all at the same time, and we need to get beyond this negativity and fear. And we have been asking the media, it's not the media's fault because we asked them to do it, we've been asking the media to poison us with negativity and fear. Every single news report opens with fear and negativity and the most destructive thing. Every single movie practically these days, when it starts, you know, has death and destruction and it's sanitized so it doesn't seem that gory. But, you know, we need to realize what this negative thinking is doing to us. And we need to realize that if we can, you know, and here's the other thing. I mean, I had this idea in 1990 thanks to Tom Kennedy and National Geographic. He put me on a story called, it was called Energy, you know, our electric future. And it ended up being renamed A Comeback for Nuclear Power, ? And I'll talk about that for a minute. But you know, that changed my life, that story, and the other scientific stories I was doing. It made me realize that people have these answers, and that we ourselves are sabotaging it. We ourselves are the enemy. And the media is just giving us what we pay them to give us, because we stay stuck, and then we sit there. And I can't watch CNN anymore in the morning. I can't watch the ads. You know, it's like everybody's dying and this and that. I mean, come on, you know, the ads are telling us how we're all getting old. Of course we're getting old. Let's make a good life of it. So anyway, visions of tomorrow. What the hell is it? How did it happen? It happened because as a result of this story on electricity, which turned into a story on nuclear power, I came to realize that there's a solution for electricity, and we need all the solutions, by the way, not just one, but there's a solution for electricity that is, that gets 100 times as much power out of every pound of uranium, that because it gets that extra power out of the uranium when you're done processing it, it decays to background levels in a few hundred years instead of tens of thousands of years or hundreds of thousands of years. And third, the reactors can't melt down. And they tested it. There have been dozens of reactors built like this. Admiral Rickover from the Navy sold us on the light water reactor because we had to beat the Russians in 1960, the Soviets, to giving power to Europe, and they were afraid that if we didn't rush with what we already had for the submarines, that we wouldn't stay in front. It was never supposed to be light water reactors. It was always supposed to be liquid sodium or other forms of reactors that are 1,000 times safer. So we need nuclear. It needs to be about 40% of the mix. And in the process of doing that, we're going to clean up all the waste that we have from all of the different power plants that are sitting out there in tanks next to the existing reactors. And we need wind, and we need solar, but it can't be that much of the mix because it's unstable. You know, and we need to go on with a little bit of carbon burning stuff, but we need to turn the carbon off now, and youngsters get it. The new millennials, that's why they love Bernie Sanders. Not that he's the answer, but they believe that they can do it, that their generation has the power to do it, and it's time to empower them. So let me just go through a quick bunch of pictures. This was me when I was 13 years old, and I was told I wanted to be an astronaut, and this is 1967. And Tom Kennedy didn't know this story, or he probably wouldn't have given me a job. But at age 13, I was told that I had to take shots for the rest of my life, that I was diabetic. And that, and I was told by the doctor, who didn't know that all I wanted to do was be an astronaut. He said, I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is you gotta take shots. The good news is you can do just about anything you want to do in life except be an astronaut. So I went into a depression that was beyond anything you could ever imagine, and I thought that no woman would ever be able to love me because I was taking shots, you know, and I had this variable personality because there was no way to measure blood sugar. So I was going through lows and highs of blood sugar and getting edgy at times, and you know, and I just was a mess. And I picked up the camera, and the camera was my therapy. The camera enabled me to stand up to a beautiful woman like Danita and take her picture and not have to talk about myself. And she was happy because I was taking beautiful pictures. And I had a compassionate heart, and I had a way of dealing with people and getting the best out of them. And so I became a natural people photographer, graduated from Yale, and and I invented the flash helmet, which was an important part of this, because I couldn't, you know, my father was a minister, I couldn't afford cameras. And so I went to a Norman Seeff shoot, and I saw that light over your head makes people look younger, and it sort of flattens, I mean, it's lighting, come on. So the flash helmet, I invented that about 2 weeks after the Vivitar 283 came out in about 1970, what was that, 6? And the Vivitar 283 had a cord that you could put on the front of the camera so you could point the flash backwards, and the camera had a sensor that shut the flash off when the exposure was right. That never existed before. And so I put that flash helmet on, and I walked into the home of the rock star, actually the office home of the rock star that I was the most in love with, Grace Slick, from a band called Jefferson Starship that was just about to take off. And I walked up, and I put a seamless background up, and I put the flash helmet on the head, and Grace started calling me Silverman. And, you know, so here I was, this diabetic who had no possibility of any career, I thought, you know, and all of a sudden, the band that's about to become the biggest band on the face of the West Coast, you know, wants me to be their photographer. And in that first shoot, she exposed her breasts. She started to take her clothes off. She did all kinds of stuff, and she said, "You can't use those breast photos because they'll kill my mother." I'm still friends with her and with her daughter China, and I know her mother died, so I will be using those in my rock book. Anyway, this is from that first shoot. And this was the cover of one of her albums and the cover of one of her books. And of course, Jerry Garcia, we smoked some stuff and we did some other stuff. And I always got them pissed. This was after I kept them waiting for about 2 days because they thought I was going to bring them cocaine in return for a shoot for Us magazine. Journey, Jimmy Page. I became the lucky guy for Time magazine who got to do The Clash when they were in America touring. This was in Seattle. This was at Madonna's first concert. And this was the end of rock and roll photography. I was sent for Rolling Stone, and I was told when I got here for the first time that I would only be allowed to shoot the first 3 songs. And I said, fuck this. I shot the first 3 songs, and I carried my camera back into the audience on a stick for a tripod. And I'm in the middle of the audience, and I start shooting, and they sent some guy who weighed about 350 pounds at about 20 miles an hour running through the crowds until he knocked me flat. And then I realized that, you know, I need another career besides my first 5 years as a rock photographer. And then, so I went on to some other things. I started doing lighting. I started shooting authors like Shirley MacLaine and doing her book covers of her best-selling books, and Danielle Steele. And but in the end, it comes back to Tom Kennedy, and when National Geographic started giving me these month-long assignments, doing something like Volcanoes of the World. And I was lucky because I loved outer space, and I got to do stories like this one, where I was photographing the planet like it was Mercury or Mars or Venus, because it was all about the crust and what was happening there, and it was about just this amazing planet that we live on. This, when I think about, going to Tom and saying, hey, I need a little bit of extra money because the helicopter pilot wants triple pay to go into the crater of Pinatubo only a couple months after it blew. And so helicopter pilot comes in, drops us off, and then takes off and leaves us there. And he says, oh, call me on your cell phone. This was when cell phones had just come out. And I'm saying, oh God, at least I can call him. And wait a minute, there's no cell service inside of and then, oh my God, was I ever grateful for this call that Tom made. Unzen. I was also doing a story on the eclipse of the century because it was going over a major observatory. And I had just started like 7 weeks of setup, and I was also working on volcanoes of the world. And all of a sudden, this volcano Unzen in Japan starts to go crazy. And, so I call the travel agent and find out what a ticket costs and start planning to leave Hawaii to go over to Unzen. And I called National Geographic and I said, hey, I really need to do this. And my editor in the picture department, who was not quite as brave as Tom, said, no, stay where you are. This is the beginning of the volcano story. And so I didn't go. But had I gone, I was going to shoot 2 famous French photographers who died, and I would have been with them when Unzen blew. And a pyroclastic flow came rushing down the mountain. So this is that shoot that Gary mentioned, where we flew into the crater. At 14,000 feet, I started to pass out with hypoxia. The door was off the helicopter, and I think Gary realized it and told the pilot to go down. But we just took risks beyond, and we take risks, and photographers are a weird, unusual breed. But space is what I loved, and solar eclipses, and this was the beginning of digital. This was one of my first composites of pictures I'd taken, except for Jupiter, that I got from my friend Brad Smith, who's on the board of directors of Visions of Tomorrow. And the point is that through these years, I met people who have teamed up and are collaborating with me, and I need lots more collaborators to get this film finally into production. Brad Smith was in charge of the cameras that went to Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune on Voyager. And he's the vice president of Visions of Tomorrow. So, and again, this came from Tom and from Rich Clarkson, I think, during his brief stay at National Geographic. This was my first National Geographic shoot for Supernova 1987A, the brightest supernova of 300 years or whatever. And eclipses and the things that I love most. But let's try to move forward through all of this technology. And what I was able to do when it was film and not digital was I was able to figure out how to take a film that had reciprocity failure that made it be maybe ISO 400 at the beginning of the exposure, and then after about a minute it was down to ISO 2. Digital photography makes star photography easy, but back in those days almost no one knew how to do it, and I knew how to do it because the astronomers taught me. You take your film to a lab, a special lab that regular photographers don't get to go to. You have them take it out of the canister, they put it in a tank that's airtight, suck the air out, put in pure nitrogen, bake it, and then put the film back in the canister and seal the canister and put it on dry ice, and then I'd be running around the world with a ice chest full of dry ice and frozen film that hadn't been exposed to the atmosphere yet, and I would take hypersensitized film, and I was able to get night shots like this and learn within a range what exposures work with moonlight and strobe light and starlight and dusk light and all that stuff. And it was just an incredible adventure. I never knew what I was going to get. Those little yellow lights are me strobing the dishes from the bottom at the VLA. But this, today with digital cameras, it's much easier. It's just so much easier. And I had such an exciting world out there. So many things that I got to see that I'm just so grateful to have been a part of.
And then finally, I get sent to train with the astronauts for the Hubble repair mission and dive with them. And that's me in the Vomit Comet on the left side there with my vomit bag in my pocket. But what does this have to do with Visions of Tomorrow or William Shatner? The point is that I met in the third phase of my career, the most of my photography career when I was doing photography full time, was I met the most inspired thinkers on the planet. And what I learned when I hung out with people like Linus Pauling on his 80th birthday and actually got him to juggle and put him with that orange back glow, what I learned is that these guys had smile lines, that the lines on their faces at the age of 80 were beautiful. That those of us who are working, and I tell you, it's not the people in this room that I'm talking about because we are on the edge, but the people who were doing jobs they hated, that were too afraid to take risks, that were living on, just struggling with a life that they couldn't stand, their lines on their faces made them look incredibly old and ugly. And people like Linus, he was young in spirit, and this is what I'm talking about with Visions of Tomorrow. This is who we all have to become. The smile lines show the soul. You can have two people who are 20 and put them side by side and they will look equally handsome or beautiful. But one of them may have, an evil disorder that's going to lead them to be a sinister, horrible person. And you can't tell that until they're older and their face lines start to show it. So anyway, Linus was a hero to me, and I was watching all this bad news, and so now it's about chasing hope. What I've done is I've put together, we've spent a few $100,000. I've put together a team of scientists and researchers. I've hired Andy Revkin from the New York Times is kind of the head of research, and we've researched solutions to the world's 7 biggest problems. And we are ready to film the answers under development, and we're ready to go, boom, here's how we fix that, and boom, here's how we fix that. And these answers may not all be the right answers, but people are thinking about it, and they're excited, and they have the face of Linus Pauling as they talk of it. And boom, here's another answer, and boom, here's another answer, and oh, by the way, philosophically and spiritually, here's how we all need to become a part of this. We don't have to do it ourselves, but we have to believe it can be done to make it happen. And that is Visions of Tomorrow. Thank you.